Hey, you're listening to the Big Breakdown podcast with Kris, Stafford, and Harrison Marshall. Take it away, fellas.
Hello and welcome along to season 4 of the Big Breakdown podcast, where in this season we are looking at talent development. In today's episode, we are looking at the talent development pathway. Harrison, we've had a great response to our previous 3 episodes on athletic development, psychosocial behavioural development, and technical and tactical development. This should now sort of bring it to life for the next few weeks about what that looks like in an actual practical environment.
Yes, and it's very exciting. I think those first 3, those 3 episodes we've just had are being quite eye-opening in some regards, and it's great to see that they're doing really well. Getting lots of listens, actually sparking some conversations. I think people in my environment have given them a listen, and I know that we're now implementing some of that stuff, and it's really exciting. And now it'd be quite interesting to talk to well, firstly, our guest today around how he's looked to implement it nationwide across the pathway, but then in the next 2 episodes around how people have actually, how coaches have actually done it in their own environments.
Yeah, definitely, and that's the exciting bit of the next few weeks, really, isn't it? It's looking at sort of what them environments are producing, how that's working, and some great guests to come. So today we are joined by Don Barrell, Head of Performance Programmes and Pathways at England Rugby. In a playing career that saw him representing England Sevens, Barrell made his Saracens debut in March 2004 in a Premiership clash against Northampton. He left Saracens to play for Bedford Blues in 2011, but was still present at Saracens as an academy coach and after his retirement in playing rugby in 2014. He thrived in the role as academy manager and has produced players such as Maritoje, Nathan Earl and Nick Tompkins. After 18 years with Saracens, Don joined England Rugby in 2017, where he was responsible for leading and managing the National Academy programme. Don joins us today to chat about the academy pathway. And Don, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
No, I think it would be good to chat sort of everything pathways. I think sort of what would be quite nice to sort of start with is if you could just give us sort of an overview of what your role is within the RFU.
Yeah, so Don Barrell, I guess job title is Head of Performance, Pathways and Programmes, so really responsible for our long-term, the pathways that will get people from first senses that there might be some long-term potential through to hopefully a seniors or a roses cap and everything in between, really, trying to find some coherence, some aligned direction. And yeah, just overall sight across what we're doing. So very, very narrow for you.
I think it's interesting because we look at sort of pathways quite different, don't we? I remember when I first saw you do a talk, it was at Wellington, sort of pre-COVID, and you put the university college up where they didn't actually put paths down until a year in, so people could form where the best way to travel were, because everyone's pathway is different. So I suppose how do you try and account for that within sort of the England Rugby pathway? How do you do that? How do you with pathway? Everyone's pathway is different. What's the actual structure of it?
Yeah, I think the first thing you do is you accept that's reality. So sure, we get a lot of nicely drawn pictures, which everyone will normally show you, and they tend to be a bit wide and finish narrow. We completely get the reality is everyone's pathway is different. I think probably in that talk, and whether or not I said it about the time or something, I think it's really true. There's a book by Robert McFarlane called The Old Ways, which is about pathways and walking and experience, and he looks at the word, where does the word to learn come from? And it's from 2 really old words. One, I guess, was to learn by following a path. I think that is really the truest sense of a pathway. It's there as a journey. It will take you from points, you will learn along it. I think we accept that different people's pathways will be very different. They will learn at various stages along it. It's a very continual thing. It doesn't start and stop when you get on it. It happens, before the official ones, in between the official ones, after the official ones. So we accept that as a reality, and then our job is to try and design and have systems that give people plenty of opportunity to develop, to be seen, to be developed, to stay in, to go out, to come back in again. And I think whilst we would probably draw it and articulate it a bit more clearly, we definitely acknowledge that our system needs to do all those things.
And
So
is that how have you found managing all those different things? Because it, like you said, the reality is that the pathway has to narrow as it gets to the top because of participation numbers and the amount of spots that are available at the potentially the top of the pathway. So how do you manage? How have you guys gone about managing expectations, and actually, if people have to drop out of the pathway and in through exit points, how you manage them leaving the pathway, and also how on the opportunity to come back into the pathway?
Yeah, look, we will try and be as broad as we can for as long as we can. There will always be a point when resource availability of people or program, forces some decisions. I think that's also one of those kind of things that lives in constant tension. How many people do we want to bring in? If we kept in everyone in the country all the way through, you'd probably say actually that's not the right thing, because that's never sharp enough. I think it's a question you continually look at, refine, discuss. How do we manage expectation? I think that's one of the really important principles of any good pathway, that they're very clearly communicated. People understand how you would get onto it. That idea of signposting is critical. Like a good path is well signed at times, and it shows people how you find the start of it. I think we'd also be clear when you come off it. We want people to understand why, but also there's chances to rejoin. So when we look at how from our academy or centre of excellence pathway, when people leave that, they need to understand how they can get back in. So that might be where CB's county squads come back into it, or university teams, different leagues, championship. All those things are part of the pathway. The job is to try and make it as clearly communicated and well aligned as you can.
So sort of starting at the bottom then, Don. So you've sort of been through how it starts now and then works its way up. What is the starting point then within sort of this pathway?
Starts broad.
That's broad.
Not narrow. So look at the bottom level is the rugby you can pick up without any kind of barrier to participation. So ideally your local club, school, college, whoever's playing it, really, a sense when there isn't an overly formal selection to join that program. So that's where rugby starts. I guess before that, you can just run around in a park with your mates before you've even joined a local club. That's, both of those things we're hugely supportive of and encourage. So that's what we, that's the base level. The pathway, I guess, where my job would involve and we'd start it is as soon as there is a selective stage to join it, we would start to say. So I guess it's worth saying when I'm referring to pathway today, that's what I'm talking to, a selective stage that you need to go into or through to be on it. So excitingly, so the DPP, which has been in the male pathway for some years now, launches less than a couple of weeks in the women's pathway for the first time, which is brilliant. So we're pulling those programs in line with each other. That's quite a broad selective stage. So I think really well described to me once by saying, the process that used to happen where you would turn up on a day and someone would stand with a clipboard and tick or cross against your name, and your pathway entry could have been decided at one point in time. The DPP is really in place to do that same process, but over 2 or 3 years. So yes, it narrows and it filters, but rather than a day, you've got a timescale of years. So we really work on that principle. If people are unsure, if you're unsure, join it. Give someone time and opportunity to be sure. I think as we push, as we try and become a more inclusive, a more diverse pathway, and I think those things will really be in support of better ultimate performance. We also need to be really clear, what kind of affordance do we need to give people? I think that's what the DPP does. So if I've been playing rugby since I was 5, I will probably present very differently from someone who's picked up a ball in year 7 for the first time. Now, it doesn't mean the end point of either of those two people is any different. What probably is very different is how they present in that period, and potentially some of the affordances we need a system to give them. Time, support, quality of coaching, understanding. I think those things are really critical. So that's what the DPP should be doing for us, is acting as a very passive, kind of supportive, nurturing, developing filter, but over a long period.
So I go with the DPP. It's I guess some of it's very much managed by the academies and the 14 especially in the boys side. I know that it's the 14 premier clubs and academies across the country. How important is it for you to make sure that they are still relatively aligned with each other? If you might have an Exeter going in one direction and a Northampton DPP going in a different direction, is it important for you guys at the top to make sure they are aligned, or allowing some flexibility within those structures?
Yeah, good question. So DPPs are really, there's 3 stakeholders in it: the union, RFU, the regional academy club, and the CB county. So 3 stakeholders will run it. I guess the sense to give you is centrally led, regionally delivered. Absolutely, there has to be local difference. So from Cornwall to Cumbria, there is change. As I'm sure everyone would kind of proudly tell you, they're very different needs in each area. There are equally principles that cannot change from our point of view when we're looking at systems. So should every player have the same opportunity to access a pathway? Absolutely. That's non-negotiable, doesn't change wherever you are. Quality of care, quality of experience. Actually, there are some probably core themes in coaching we want to expose players to. We want to make sure they're very similar. However, how you need to solve that problem to deliver it is probably different on your patch as it is to mine. So we need to give you the flex and freedom to be able to do those 2 things.
Yeah, no, and I think that's it's quite, and this is what I enjoy. I mean, I work with 16 to 18-year-olds, so I'm a part of the ACE college, and we've got I've got a lad who's currently away in South Africa with the under-18 squad. And I think speaking to him, and when he comes back, I think he enjoys the different conversations he has that from different players that have gone through the different pathways. So I think it's important that they're getting that flexibility, and they're getting touched on in they're being molded in slightly different ways in different areas. But what you do notice is that when they do come together if it is at 18s level, especially at the top, is that those core values have been instilled. I think that's what probably the RFU do quite well and within their 5 core principles. So I think I totally agree. Has there been, like, you don't have to say, but what for you has been like the major challenges with the DPP and going forward?
I think it's a good way to look at it is potentially some of the healthy tensions, and I think they're right. So when we speak to them, we have to look into what is some of the performance tensions you'll have. So you'll have it in your if there is a style of play that may be present in a senior team, for example, and we could have that either internally with England, you could have it in a Premiership club. So if there's a style of play that people might feel you want to, players will need to know that to be able to step up into that next level and really achieve, step in, thrive, develop. However, we also need to acknowledge, the player you're talking about now, 17, 18 years old, when they're, touch with a regular Premiership player in 5 years, it's probably a very different style of play. It will be a very different style of play that's currently going in. So there's always questions on how much do we need to give people exposure to the next level so that they can actually go in and be competent and not shortchange them really in a development experience, but probably never quite letting the top completely drive the needs of your development program. And I think that lives in a constant tension. You need to, if you're thinking about your system, how much do how much do you want to expose players to that this season, and then this month, this week, in the next 10 minutes, how much do we want to be, some carbon copy of senior stuff, and how much do we think that should be generic skills, core competency? So I think that lives forever. That will always be there, and your job as a coach is to make healthy decisions on that, and really kind of make calculated. Today we're going to do this. Actually, over a season it will be this much, and this is why. Because I think your job is to provide some scaffolding, some framework when you're thinking about those things. But equally, your job is to also make sure the player's adaptable enough to, when everyone turns left in 5 months because something unforeseen happens, or that's just a new coach, a new style of play, the players can shift into that.
Yeah, I think there's a phrase that's stuck in my head around the development pathways. That's making the players technically safe but tactically adaptable. I think that's even working it in my environment in an ACE. We'd like to win the ACE League, but we're still part of that development pathway. And the players that we've got, yes, we're associated with WAS, but we'd be happy if any player was to go on and go into any environment and thrive. So they can only do that if they are tactically adaptable. So like I said, that is a tough balance. And I think there are probably some niche stories in which people are caught in between, but I think from working in the environment, they are getting more closely aligned than ever.
Yeah, and I think we developed the England Rugby Development Framework specifically to call out things that we think won't change. If we're talking about rugby, and in 10 years' time, we will probably say, do players need to be able to have an awareness of space? Yeah, that will be real. Catch, pass, kick, they will probably continue to be real. There are some things, we'd say that all positions need to be able to do these things. Then there'll be some technical pieces for your position. Again, depending on where you are, when we wrote that framework, if you ask a under 13s community coach what's important about a prop, they will go, nothing, because they don't really have too many positions and everyone has a go. If you ask one of the senior coaches, clearly there are some real specific technical bits. So somewhere the job is to map out the journey from I don't care about positions to, if I can't do this highly technical thing consistently, then I won't be playing for England. That was what we tried to articulate, that journey at different stages. Different things start to become true, and then you have to plan and map that pathway through those.
So just bringing back to a sort of a coaching point of view, I suppose the whole focus of that bottom end of the pyramid is just allowing players to explore, really, isn't it? And form solutions and stretch their own sort of ability to be able to play. When obviously this was all, and I appreciate that the clubs are all different and run things like, was there a set of what were the key core skill competencies that you maybe have outlined at that level that we should be working on away from sort of that? So is it just simply just catch, pass, break? What sort of ideas is it that for at that level, these are sort of the different opportunities that we're given for players to like to explore and test their skills at that level?
Yeah, and that is literally the language we've used in that framework. So we talk about explore the boundaries of player capabilities. You probably can't put enough tools into someone's toolbox at that point. If someone is early in the journey, it is as important that you foster and create this love for the game that's going to see them through the bits if they want to go forward, where it gets a bit harder and it gets a bit more difficult, and they're going to face in quite directly to some difficult patches. You need to make sure you've really given them a breadth of experience that they can call upon. So at that stage, we would encourage, variety. We would encourage, like you say, the core elements of catch, pass, kick, elements of, there are going to be some contact skills that currently people need as we go forward and we look at how the game's going to change. They may adapt, but there's going to be some need eventually to go through those things. I think in terms of a tactical understanding, how do I see space, find space, create space, those things will be real. And outside of that, we would encourage, if you've only ever run in one place, one position, you need to be changed up. We need you to look in different places. You need to see the same problem from a different position on the field. So we encourage real exploration at that point, on that first phase. So, I whilst it might not be perceived by the player always as fun, because they want to perceive competence. That's something we know is true. Players on those pathways, they want to feel like they're gaining in competence. I think when it's articulated well, that explore stuff can be done to give people that challenge stretch. And I think that's one of the key bits we'd push around those skills, but also if it keeps looking the same, we possess, just have a change up, give someone a new opportunity to experience something.
I mean, that's something me and Harrison have spoke about before, around sort of some of the when you as a player, especially for the players in these younger age, you turn up to maybe a DPP session expect to play rugby. Actually, a lot of these lads will be playing rugby within the club training session that they might have that week. Some of them might be doing it at school, some of them might be doing it fairly regularly. Is actually, do they need to come to that session necessarily need to just play more rugby when you could fine tune more specific skills, like start introducing a line out lift at the right age, so everyone's exploring different things? Because we have it here where a player will come as a centre, but they'll leave a hooker just because of the nature of the transferable positions. But you've got to then show them how to do that from scratch, rather than actually, if they explored it beforehand, they might have maybe made that transition a bit early. I think that's quite interesting. We're looking at sort of pathways and development, is that it should be providing players that opportunity, whatever the position, whatever the technical skill, to actually try it, because we're doing them, I suppose, an injustice by not allowing them to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're recognising is probably true. So I do think the game in general, whole game, has done a really good job of giving players opportunities to play. I think the coach education around it's been pretty good. You go and watch sessions in schools, clubs, anywhere, people are playing. They're doing a lot of adaptive games. The point you make out, actually, then what's the responsibilities of that pathway program? I do think it's something we've talked about internally, working on some of the technical competencies of players on that journey, because as you progress, some of those are going to be, they are going to be a difference between your ability to stay into something and perceive that you're progressing. And some of the reasons people might come out is because at certain levels, that if you're a hooker, for example, and you want to be a Premiership hooker, come the Premiership, you're going to be needing to throw 90% accurate line outs if you're going to be in those selective starting spots. That's a reality. So yeah, what do you do on your DPP times is something we spend a lot of time talking with clubs and coaches about. I think it's a good observation.
So what then changes then when you get to sort of that point of the program, maybe 17s, 18s, where you're then starting to progress into more sort of, I suppose there's a bit more pressure of winning games and stuff like that, depending on where you sit within the pathway. What then changes sort of then in terms for the players and their experiences? If we've done our job and they've progressed and they've got better, they've explored, they can fit into any environment. What sort of then, what is the noticeable difference in terms of the change once they pass that point?
I'm not sure they've stopped exploring. I don't think you ever will throughout your career. That will be true if you're a senior international with a load of caps. It will always be true. I mean, what changed at that point? Again, I still think they're broadly going to be working things out, going to be part of systems. The technical positional change will begin to settle. So if you look at where players tend to change positions, there's quite a lot up to and including that 16, 17 year, they tend to settle afterwards. Certainly a lot of your front row who progress would have been, as you say, back rows, maybe a 12. It's a lot of positional change at that point, and I think that will continue through that period. A much broader focus on the individual will begin to happen. So if you're part of an academy system, actually your needs will begin to be prioritized, probably above that of a team session. So, at that stage, and certainly in those academies, the the team is a vehicle for individual development as opposed to a priority. And I think that's, again, one of those nuances. It's really easy to get wrapped up in, the games, the competitive opportunities. They're brilliant. They're learning. They get real pressure, and there's some fantastic opportunities in it. But that team's a vehicle for you to work on the pieces on your RDP that are part of your positional change you're learning. It's when you head into the Premiership when, the team is there as priority and you're part of it. I still think at this stage, what we're saying is that the team's a bit of a vehicle for you to work on the things we want to see as an individual. And that's where the academy system will start to individualize a lot more around certain players.
So with that, so what would your advice, or what's your stance? So, when you've got an academy player who's, he's training and playing regularly with the academy, there's a lot of other stakeholders that are involved with that player at that point. So you've got the player's parents, and you've got the academy, you've got potentially the schools, and then the club that he's played for as well. How can we find an alignment there for that player to firstly not, overwork himself at a young age, but then also ensure that he is still getting that. He's still getting that tick over, even though he might be away from an academy environment.
So one of the things we've, it's gone in recent years is an annual plan which shared around all those stakeholders. So parent, player, school, club, college, whoever is part of that journey, that individual's journey, actually having a plan that's agreed out of competition. So before we've driven into any kind of emotive period of the year where there's clash. So it's a big colourful table when it starts off, because you would kind of show every game that someone could theoretically play in. And on some weekends, there might be 4 teams that player could play for. Then the question is, how do we make that decision? So we have to understand, well, have we worked out the priorities for that individual? So what do they need to work on? What would best service developing those priorities? It's not always matches. Like there's a great Mr. Van Bailey saying, competition's a good servant, but a poor master. We need to be really aware that if you want to get better at rugby, playing loads of games of rugby may not be the answer. It's probably not the answer in that stage, because we've got to be careful of, like you say, load. Actually, when you develop a technical expertise, going into a weekly playing cycle won't always give me the gaps and space I need to develop it without compromising a training block. So we map that year out. What does it look like? Let's understand the headline. So we would kind of ask that question: success in a year, in 2 years is, articulate that, and then you work back. So, okay, if that's a technical, if that's game understanding, that's fine. That might be period of physical change where someone's moving positions and we need competence. So playing loads of games alongside trying to get a physical change in a player, again, those two things don't necessarily always work, because you need to then prioritize, periodize, and really importantly, like you've called, get the stakeholders aligned on it, and make sure everybody understands that. And I think that's a big change. Critically, not to forget, we're still talking about young people who are in school, so that they have to be allowed to be a young person, and we can't take that experience away from them. Like, we're absolutely accountable to making sure they've been able to do everything they want to do as a young person, and as best we can, we get all these things kind of well sorted.
So how have you found it? So when they stepped up into this academy area, they're starting to ring into the back end of the time at the academy. The club's quite naturally going to start honing in and focusing on potentially the top 5-6 players, because they're the ones that are going to be the profitable ones that are going to offer contracts to. Now, we know that there's a big issue at the moment with player retention, and when they're going through these transitional phases. Do you think how important is it then for the academies and then all the other stakeholders to really work on that exit point for that player leaving the academy, that they stay within the game of rugby union, so they don't just drop away and fall by the wayside?
Critical. In short, absolutely critical. It's something that we we audit the academies on, so they have an annual audit, and that, you know, they release players. It is a reality. You know, they make it as clear as they can to everybody. I think they do a good job making it really clear. You know, more people will come out of this than will go through. So back to that point, we can never judge success by people who go through and wear your Premiership shirt or something else. That's one outcome. But if more people are not going to get that, then we need to make sure the experience is value adding. And I do think the academies do a really good job of helping young people have that as a value added experience. How do they do it? I think, again, they try and individualize, they try and spend time. Now, I think the majority, given some reflection time away from that moment of release, will look back and say, actually, that was a really positive experience, and we've got good evidence to show that. I think it's quite often said, people leave these academy systems, then come out of the game. We've just checked it. Like last year, we looked at where people were a year after release at 18. There's less dropping out the game entirely who've been in the academy systems than were in a community game. So I think it's whilst there are some, we always have to be a bit careful to kind of not go. We looked at the numbers and say it's relatively small. The people who've dropped out the game entirely, which I think is a positive indicator that people are doing pretty well in the main.
I mean, I can see that from being here at the university as well. And I think now, especially sort of from where I started to where we are now, there's a lot more push towards the university as an extra step to that then development pathway, and that they can mold themselves that little bit more. So we're getting a lot more communication with sort of academy managers, players and parents about sort of how we can support them for September if that opportunity is not there. And I think that is the sort of the key thing, is it doesn't have to just stop with the academy, because we touched on earlier about your pathway being different. You could come and do 3 years university rugby, develop a little bit more physically and tactically, and leave then the better player. You can still jump straight back into the system there. And I think there was a thing that came out the other day. I think there was 26, 27 sort of players from Buck Super Rugby last year have gone on to sign contracts after graduation sort of this year, which I think shows that, you know, that is an option, if just because it's not necessarily a barrier to stop you from playing. If you want to go to education and you see that as a route, that's an option for you, as well as just going and playing nationally rugby. Because if you've got to that level, you've probably got the skills to be able to fit in at a level that's right for you anyway. It's just finding that opportunity. And I think that comes to what you touched on earlier about, and Harrison said about getting the stakeholders conversations going earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose maybe one for you, you've probably got a better idea of where a player is going to be at 18 than maybe 17, 18, then you probably start having them conversations earlier than leaving it till the last few weeks of the season.
Yeah, I think that stuff, isn't it, the more time you have, the better it is to get an indication of where someone may end up. And I think that's you leave school at, you know, at 18 at the moment. That's not changing anywhere. So I think we constantly wrestle with, you know, what's the right thing within the system. Is it, you know, where do we do this handoff? And I think we're in a place where we try really hard, and the clubs try really hard to make it work as best it can. And just like you say, university might be that step for some people. That might be going to get a job and playing in some of the national leagues. There's loads of different points where people move on, and I think, you know, equally some of them will come back in, and clubs are looking at ways that they can keep engaged with players whilst they go and have that slower progression or development. So I think there isn't a single answer, I guess, is the challenge.
So what, I suppose, from just thinking about the stakeholders, and if you were, what advice would you give for sort of parents whose kids are going through this process, whether that be at DPP or then they've got through to the sort of the next step through with the junior or junior academy? What would your advice be for sort of them about the overall pathway as a structure? What's the, not the best way to advise sort of them on what the kids can do? Because again, no journey is different, but what would be the best advice for if I was a parent in this situation?
Yeah, I think it's a really big question, because it depends, you know, the age of your kid and where they are. We have written a parental consensus statement on working with academies and sports. That is online. You can access it, and we're about to sort of re-release it with some sort of new imaging and clearer statements. I think the main thing is some trust in the process. You know, we say it all the time when we're a later development sport. I'm not always sure we articulate that massively well in terms of what does that mean to a parent. So I think we have to kind of say trust the process a bit. There aren't, and I think some of the things we see are your questions we get a lot of, or my child isn't in program X, they're not in the DPP, you know, they're 15, there's plenty of time. Like I said, there's a lot of ways in, like we talked about earlier. We're in no rush. There's no evidence really to say if you're in it at 14, you're not more or less likely to make it than other people. It's just where you were on that stage at that time. I think we would say that what we're trying to do with those programs is, again, they're really accessible. So if you do live in an area or on a patch, you know, we want to make sure that you can contact them. So if you have a player, you should be able to reach out to the program and say, you know, my child, we think that's potential. Can we have a discussion? Can they come and be seen or reviewed? Like that's part of the process. I think we want to make sure it's flexible, adaptable. And then I guess if people are unsure, you should be able to get in contact with the stage of the program you're at and have a conversation. That's something that would be a good, as a marker, and we'd expect to have all of them. It's a good health check of where they are. So I think trust the process. You know, there are plenty of opportunities, and I think there are loads of different ways that people can come through to be successful in rugby.
Yeah, I need us sort of specifically on the parents there, 'cause I know the parents just want the best for the kids, right? And sometimes they don't, you know, it's going about the ways of understanding the system to be able to then get the best for them. Yeah. And the majority of the conversations that I have tend to be more with parents than the actual player, first and foremost, as a sort of an intro, because they're just trying to help guide. So on the other side, what would the advice be for the player? Would it be different, or is it kind of the same? Just trust the process and enjoy the experience. That's the question for you.
Yeah, I think look, the player bits is exactly that. We'd also definitely request that people start to, you know, you really start to, I think as you go forward, ask good questions about your journey, begin to understand there is a responsibility for you to begin to develop that understanding on how do I manage, guide, focus on my own career. That's a really critical piece. I think outside of that, the reason we published, again, that development framework is so players can read it, understand the things we'll be talking to and discuss. I think the more people begin to manage or look after their own journey, I think the better that will become for them. So I think we'd encourage you to have a go, to sort of fail safe, fail fast within the environment, and I think you should be given the affordance and understanding to do that.
I think on the with the flip side of that, from the coaching perspective, whether you're involved coaching within the DPP or within coaching at a school or a club, I think the key word there is just communication, and actually communicating and being open and honest as much as you can with with players and parents. We all know that there's some parents that get close to that line of interference, and then there's some parents that just leave you to it. But I think if you're really clear with your communication around what the outcomes are for the DPP, the academy, the club, the college, then all of a sudden it's a lot easier to get everyone aligned on that same path. So I think that's something we touched on it in the previous series around understanding our who, and that's not just understanding players, that's also understanding the wants and needs of all the stakeholders that you'll be working with. So I think that's the key word, that's the good one there. I think you touched on earlier that it's quite an exciting time for the women's pathway and the girls program with the introduction of the ERDPP for them. Is that going to be almost a carbon copy, or what are the subtle differences that we see within the girls pathway to the boys?
Yeah, so look, mega exciting in terms of girls pathway start. The bits that I think have been done really well would be that program that's going to provide loads of I guess opportunity for a longer term view, longer term development program. The age bands in the women's pathway have just changed. They've gone to 2-year bandings, so they're now under 12s, 14s, 16s, 18s. Previously they had 3-year gaps, so 15s, 18s, 12s. So I think that's credit to the game growing. I think that's why the DP is launching now, because the pathways are beginning to grow. I think we recognise it's brilliant opportunity for young women to, see what the sport's about, actually work out. It's a cracking place to be, to learn some new skills, to make friends, to develop. I think, again, back to principles that we talk around, every young girl should have the opportunity, regardless of where you live, to access a pathway program and have that development experience. So that's critical. There should be a similar kind of core skill competency focus. So we're really concentrating on comparative experience between men's and women's, but then clearly there are differences. So look, I'm not the best person to tell you what young women will need within those DPP pathways. We've got outstanding staff who work in it, and they're really the barometer. So they're out understanding what we need, what the girls need, what we think is actually strategically future interest, future direction. I think there clearly are differences, but in terms of comparative experience and opportunity, they're very similar. And I think actually they're questions we ask ourselves all the time. So, I think, look, it's massively exciting. We want to make sure that, again, same outcome. We have an oversupply of really talented players into the Prem and into rosy shirts, and we make it difficult for the head coach to make selections. That's got to be the long-term aspiration of that. But broadly, young women get into the rugby programs, love their experience, have added value, and stay in the game, playing, coaching, administrating long-term. And I think that's hopefully going to come, as we progress as part of an outcome of that.
So it's been introduced now, the DPP, because of the increased
September. Yeah, September it will start.
And that's due to the increased numbers of young girls that want to play the sport.
Yeah, and we've, in line with the change in age bands, centres of excellence used to run across 3 years, so 16, 17s, 18s. They now run just at 17 and 18. We completely wanted a kind of long-term focused development programme. And again, DPP gave us a way of that centrally led, regionally delivered model where we have a really core set of KPIs that each DPP will need to hit. But also, they're going to be able to have an input regionally on what do we need to do to make it work here. And I think in general, the RFU is really committed to making the game more diverse, more inclusive. Each area will have different needs. So each area will have a different area, different thing to focus on, depending on actually who are we not representing well, where do we need to be better? So what do we need to engage, how? And that's going to look, again, that will look really differently around the country. But the principle is, let's get more people in the game, make sure we're looking internally and saying, is this experience something they want to come back to? And not only will that just make it a brilliant environment, because it'll be cracking to be able to be around it, but it will have a performance benefit, because the more people we eventually get into the system, the broader a range of people there are to pick from, to develop. And I think it does two things, like they don't have to live in isolation. So I think it's a win-win.
And again, we're seeing that more with the universities. There's more players coming through that have played before. Historically, sort of that Freshers Week, there'd always be sort of a good sign-up, but there was a less percentage of them had played the game before. Now it's the other way around. More players are coming already have experienced the game, played the game, and want to take their rugby to the next level. And that's sort of what we've tried to do, is we've linked up with the Championship club locally that then feed through to the Premiership, so that the players can start seeing that there's this pathway now at 18, that they can come train with the uni, train with the club, and then progress through to that, either be a Sale or DMP sort of from Yorkshire, because there's connections there as well.
Yeah,
I think that's important, is that it's making aware to the players all the way through that your opportunity to progress doesn't just stop when you get to a certain age. Everything that we spoke about before, there's an opportunity to move on wherever you are, really. If you're talented, that you should be given that opportunity to play. Just sort of, from going back to sort of what Harrison was just saying with the coaching, even if I'm not coaching sort of within within specifically the DPP or part of that pathway, just the club coach or school teacher, why is it really important for me to understand what is expected sort of at these different stages of sort of DPP in terms of preparing the players to get to that thing? What could I be doing in my environment if I'm coaching under 12s, under 13s now, preparing players to eventually be picked up by DPP? What advice would you give to them?
Yeah, I think any coach, regardless of the question is worth asking yourself is, where have the people come from? and where are they going. I think if you just check in on those two things, you'll be much better at understanding any frustrations that you may have or needs you kind of perceive. And then also, I think you have that responsibility, duty of care to say, well, if they're going to this place, so it's a question you can ask yourself as a performance question, what do I need to do to prepare them for it? Or just as a kind of duty of care question. Well, again, what do I want to do to help these people take that step? So look, I would check in, depending wherever you coach. So, where are they coming from, and where they're going to go afterwards. And I think those two things will really help you regardless of stage. Appreciate that's not a specific answer, but it's a big broad one, because I think it's the best thing coaches can do. I'd love to say to you, go and have experience in 15 different environments, and you may be able to do that if you're fortunate to be a full-time coach or someone who's got that. Actually, quite often we are dealing with super well-meaning, really brilliantly intentioned people, but who will also be busy at some of these stages. They will have other jobs, they will have other commitments, so they're turning up with great intent. Our job is to help them be brilliant at the stage they're at, and I just think those two framing questions will help you. We wouldn't be anywhere without the volunteers across CBs, across schools, across local clubs, the parents that drive miles. Like, they are genuinely the lifeblood of any pathway. You'd never have a successful performance pathway without the thousands of volunteers below it. So I think I can give you an answer that'd be really specific related to someone who's full-time and has that affordance, but I think if you're at that level, just try and understand where people come from and what you want to do to help them go on.
And I think that's down to a sort of understanding the structure of the way it's set up, the way that it is, that you can be aware that, like you say, if you ask themselves the question, where they come from, where they're going now, do they have the potential? And I suppose it's that differentiation between, do they have the potential, or are they at that point where they're just not going to get, they're at that level, that's where they'll probably stay. Do they have potential to go to that next bit? What opportunities, if I open this door for them, can they get that a little bit better? It's understanding what we've spoke about a lot, is really getting to know your players that are in front of you and getting an understanding of what they could potentially do next. Because usually, I suppose, the players that usually are the better players, or seemed as talented, are usually the ones that are doing multiple different sports. So they're just generally more active, or they've got better fundamental movements than some of the others. It's just being aware of, well, actually, maybe Harrison, for example, might actually benefit from this opportunity more because he's not getting these opportunities elsewhere. It's not necessarily your best players that I suppose need to go. It's recognising who will maybe benefit more. Is that a fair statement? Or
yeah, I think no. We just got to be careful, as when are we calling someone's capable of going on? Like, I think we have to, and bearing in mind, like, it's my job to oversee a national pathway, so I think I've got a fair bit of knowledge in some of it. I definitely couldn't tell you with a 16-year-old if they're about to put on a single Indiana shirt or not. And there's a lot of people who will kind of make really big calls at that point. You just don't know. And we've got some really good evidence in terms of, the number of under 16s that people have asked to be signed off to play a few years up. They are no more or less likely to go through into contracts than those who haven't. So just because someone presents as really good at that point, we have to be very, very careful. I think as you get older, 17, 18, 19, you'll have an idea, but it probably takes longer than people will think to have a really good idea of where someone to go to. So I think it's fair comment. I just also always wave that flag of caution that we need to, as best we can, be really careful to, as soon as you get to a point in your head when you have a black and white opinion of someone, you probably need to go and get a different opinion from someone else and challenge yourself. And I think that's a really critical part of the path. That's why you've probably heard it a few times, about many eyes, many times, many environments before you make a decision. That will really help check any bias or thoughts you've had or got.
Yeah, well, we did the whole thing on the Masters was on sort of unconscious bias, and you do tend to make judgments without actually seeing the whole thing. And I just know from sort of chatting to some people, when it comes to that nomination phase, they'll either nominate the whole team because they think they're all world beaters, rather than actually really delving into understanding of the skill levels that the players have got, what level they're at as a team. And I think it'd be interesting to how many people actually ask these questions that you said earlier about, you know, where have they come from and where they're going. The sort of, I think when the nomination forms come through, they very much just think of the here and now rather than actually that process that they might have gone through.
Yeah, I know there's some good ways people can check that. You know, how long has someone been playing rugby? Actually, what's their kind of sports age? What is their rugby age? You know, what's their trained age? And if they've been playing rugby for 5 years, again, you know, that was 1 session a week for 5 years, or if they were doing 5 sessions a week for 2 years, both of those people will probably look very different. So I think there's some really simple check-ins you can do to understand someone's history before you start to make a intent. But yeah, absolutely, we all carry loads of bias. We just got to be aware of it.
Especially with like a nomination process, I know that if you're going to nominate a whole team, I think it's more around the coach saying, "I've got 25 lads in the Newcastle DPP," rather than, you know, what's best for those players at that time. You know, and that's where it's always a fine balance between, you know, giving these players that edge to want to win a competition, but then also making sure that they're still developing at a safe and right way.
Yeah, and you know, I do like kids, young people. Winning sometimes gets really mixed up. You know, it's not a taboo word to use in development. Like if you line up a load of, as I've got, 7-year-olds or 4-year-old, you know, my 2 kids, put them in line and just say go, like they'll all leg it, and one of them will want to win, and someone will be disappointed if they don't. And the same with when we play festivals or tournaments, when people just play 3 games, it's not a knockout. We don't have they are so competitive, these people in pathways, like they want to win everything, and that's okay. It's why we talk about it within, again, the development framework. It's completely an endpoint. England senior teams go out to win matches. That is what happens. The winning should never drive your programs, but what we work on and focus on with young players is, you know, you can win process, you can win how well prepared you are compared to someone else, actually how much work you've done. You can be first off the floor compared to someone else. There are a load of things that you control, that individuals control, will get them to focus on. Game outcomes, really important at the top end. Of course, everyone's disappointed if the England under 20s don't win a Six Nations game. People will be really upset, the players and stuff. That's not a judgment of whether or not that's successful, that program, because people are traveling through it and it's a vehicle for those individuals. I think we have to be, you know, we're okay with it. It's really helpful. It's part of the world, but it should never drive your development program, but it's completely where people are heading to.
I think that's an important message for all coaches, all parents, for all teachers. Is yes, I agree. Winning is important, and it's intrinsic as human beings. We want to win. No one wants to lose in anything. But it's how we frame what winning is. And you know, you give great examples of first off the floor, but it might just be like, you know, framing what winning for you in this race might be completely different to winning for someone else. Within their race, when there might be a different age and stage of the cycle, and that's where it goes back to, like, you know, understanding your participants and then being clear and open and honest with them to say, you are at a different stage. That doesn't mean you've lost there, right? You've won. So if you're doing a timed sprint, well, you're quicker than your last time, so that's a win, is it not?
Yeah, look, what people can really overcomplicate it. Like, I think in these development programs, winning the game is completely something the players want to happen. The coaches will definitely, you know, everyone, they are competitive. It's never the primary driver. It's around, you know, the game. The team is a vehicle to make those individuals better and grow. And it may be in your world, and if you're part of a league or competition structure, within that development system, it's very clearly a development system within academies to help progress individuals. It's not the other way around. So I think when you look at the academy managers, they're a brilliant group. Like they talk, they share between themselves, they share learnings, because they are judged on, actually, how people come through, the quality of for the players, how adaptable they are, not on whether or not they win the 18s Academy League. And I think that's why it's a really good community to be part of, because people just want to learn, improve, and it's great to see the level of conversation sharing that goes on.
I think that's something that even the coaches in the community game should be doing as well, of sharing good stories about what they're doing well, what they've learned. Whether that's when I've moved, if you've got a group and you've moved up from under 14s to under 15s, the next group of coaches that are coming to coach them under 14s, you tell them about what you've experienced over that last 12 months, so that they can then hopefully, they're aware of some of the challenges that they might come across as well, because no doubt they'll probably come across the same, especially like you say earlier, that they're a volunteer coach that they're giving up the Sundays and maybe one night a week to do some coaching, that they probably will end up with the same sort of barriers. And I think that openness of sharing is something that all coaches probably need to do better, especially within the community game. Yeah,
and I think that the idea of community is critical, isn't it? Like we talk about it all the time: coaching community, playing community, rugby community. Like that, it makes, if it's a good place to be, people want to be there, and I think we are aware of that, and we all work hard to add into it.
Don, it's been great chatting to you about it. I think there'll be loads of stuff there sort of around the pathway that I think a lot of coaches will take away from it. I think it's been a good education about how it's structured and sort of what that looks like. So we really appreciate your time coming on and having a chat.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Harrison, a great chat there with Don around sort of pathways. I think there was a lot to take away there for coaches within any level, really.
Yes, yeah, and I think what was really quite prevalent throughout all of that, that chat was how it all links back to the things that we've already covered in the previous episodes, and I think this is what the RFU do quite well. We know that having done our qualifications from the England Coaching Award to the England Advanced Coaching Award, it's these things that they push quite well. And it's good to see that it is important for the pathway as well. And as much as it is about getting top players to play for England and play for the Red Roses and Premiership clubs, it's also about making sure that they're developing and having a worthwhile experience in which they want to stay within the game of rugby union.
Yeah, and I mean, I thought that during the conversation in terms of there's a lot of stuff that we've spoke about over all 3 seasons of the pod so far around sort of understanding your players. I think was quite a key area that came through, and I really like one of the questions that were 2 of the questions that Don said that coaches could ask themselves was around where are they now and where have they come from. They should be sort of their check-in points as sort of where a player is on their journey. And the whole pathway, whatever process you're in, is a journey. There's no, you could enter and come back in at different levels of your journey, and it's fluid and it's dynamic, and it's all about exploring. Especially from a rugby perspective, it's exploring and putting your skills under a variety of different pressures to be able to fit into any rugby environment after that, and that you continue and stay in the game long term.
What was clear that exploration is key throughout the whole pathway, and I like that about what Don was saying around even if they're at a younger age, yes, it's about that exploring your boundaries and the players' capabilities, both technically and tactically, but then that should never go away, even if you're still towards the end of the pathway and you're fastly approaching your 40s and clear to retirement, right? Rugby should still be about all sports, actually, not just rugby, but sports should be about exploring boundaries, whether that be technical, tactical, but then I'd also argue psychosocial, physical development as well. Right? Let's be afraid that let's not be afraid of how far we can push these boundaries to really see how far we can push ourselves.
And that came out of the conversation with Don. He touched on a bit about how, with the DPP program now, it's not about sort of trying to see the person there and then. The journey could be, for the year, could be for 2 years, depending on, the nature of where you're at, where you enter. And he touched on how it was all around the affordances of providing time, support, quality of coaching, and then, like you say, developing some understanding of physical and psychosocial behavioural stuff, which is we've touched on as well already, sort of in the series. And I think this is probably one thing. You speak to like parents and stuff, and you know everyone will have their opinion of what the DPP should be and what it should look like. When actually, what I got the conversation with Don is, yes, it's about developing these players, but the reality is not every player is going to get there. It's making sure that they have that high quality of experience, come out at the end of it a better player, and then are still playing the game after they get moved on or after their journey within the academy stuff stops. It doesn't stop. It continues whatever level you go. You've got the skill set to go into any other environment.
But that's where it's, and we touched on it in the episode. That's where it's really important to make sure the stakeholders are aligned, and that safety net is there for the players, and the players do realise that, you know, ultimately it's bloody tough getting to the top. And how can we frame exiting or not making it in a different way, in a more positive way that actually makes them want to stay? And we do that by creating positive environments, you know, making sure that their enjoyment is at the center of it, and actually they enjoy the process of learning and engaging and meeting new people and pushing themselves to the boundary limits. But then also from an academy or a DPP, and also the teachers and the coaches at the club, it's like the communication. You've got to be really clear, and you know, and I can piece them up with, you know, a good path is always well signed, and these are all paths. These are pathways to the top, but these branch off, and they don't always lead to the top. They might lead to another area, which actually you find that's more beneficial for you and more aligned with what your mindset is as a player.
Yeah, and well, I mean, we touched up within that around that element of, you know, winning. And I've never met a player in any coach in any group or anything that I've been involved in that there's no player that's gone onto the field of play where there's not view of I want to win this game. I don't think that's ever brought into question. But it's like I really like that winning should never drive the process. You know, winning is actually winning and lose. You know, being able to lose is that's a skill as well that we need to learn, and you can do that within the safe space. But you know, the competition is a good servant but a bad master. I think what was what I've got written down here. I think I've paraphrased what Don actually said. But I think that is also key. Is yes, we don't want to take away that element of competition, but we don't let it drive what we're doing. We've still got to allow the players, like we say, to explore and think of solutions and develop as players and people without being driven by the end result of that time frame of a game.
You never lose, Chris. You always learn, and that's quite prevalent. And actually, it's about how we frame what winning looks like. Winning can be intrinsically motivated and intrinsically done, and that's where you'll see players want to engage more and want to learn more and want to stay in the sport more. So I think that is key.
It's managing that expectation on all fronts with that as well. You know, you made that point as well. A good pass is well timed. So actually, where we sort of as coaches we say yes, you know, the result might not have gone our way, but this is what we've learned around it. You know, maybe not focus at the end of the game, focused on what the score is, focus on set some goals of what you want to achieve within that time frame. What do we want to see by the end of it? What, in terms of how goes back to planning, but where do we want to see the players at this point in time? You know, the minute we then add that result in, that's when pressure forms, and then that's what clouds your decision makers. When you know you want them to be, they want to be aware of that, but being able to manage that is a big skill in itself, and that is what a lot of the time will differentiate some people that make it to the top, is because they can manage their emotions in that way.
But then that's why I think it links quite nicely back to, you know, the conversation we had with Mark Bennett. You know, maybe after the game, our first thing should be, you know, around what did you commit to it, and that can be the frame of how you frame winning, right? Did you commit to all the decisions that you did out there? Did you show that bravery? And if you did, then that's a win, because we can go away and we can on the training pitch we can work on those. We can upskill you technically. You know, through the use of video analysis we can upskill you tactically. But you know, if you're not committing to it, then well, I don't know if you've learned, if you're engaging in the learning process at all then.
No, so it's a good point. So another cracking episode. I think we're now going into actually the journey of what that looks like out on the grounds. We've covered all the key physical, psychosocial, behavioural, tech, tack, and now what the pathway looks like. Now it's going into the nitty gritty, the how, what that looks like on the ground, and we've got some exciting guests to sort of bring all this to life. So another good episode. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Charlie's got all of our social media details at the end. We'll see you next time.
Cheers for listening. Don't forget to join in the discussion at Big Breakdown HQ on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.